Claire, look at me. I have been searching for you for 20 years. You sealed a child!
You should have been more afraid of the woman she'd become, not this time.
Claire knelt on black marble slick with candlelight, her ivory ceremonial dress torn at the shoulder, dirt streaked across skin still raw from where she'd hit the floor. Around her, hundreds of wolves in gold and black stood beneath banners stitched with a silver wolf's snarling head, and every single one of them was laughing. Moments earlier, the moon goddess had chosen her mate. Damon, golden and cruel and certain of his own worth, had looked at her ruined dress and bare, scratched feet and decided she was beneath him. "Do you actually believe," he said, loud enough for the whole court to hear, "that I'd let an Omega like you stand beside me?" The laughter rose like a wave. "I reject Claire," Damon announced. "I choose Seraphina instead." Claire's wolf whimpered somewhere deep inside her, small and ashamed, the way it always did. Then the great doors at the end of the hall exploded open, and the laughter died as if it had never existed. Guards dropped to their knees. Alphas who had never bowed to another living soul lowered their heads to the floor. King Rowan crossed the hall in a straight, unhurried line, black cloak dragging behind him, until he stood over the girl everyone had just finished humiliating. Then, in front of every noble house in Moonfang, the Alpha King went down on one knee. "Claire." His voice. The voice that could silence a war council with 3 words, shook. "Look at me." She did. "I have been searching for you," he whispered, "for 20 years. 20 years earlier. The stronghold was burning. Rowan was barely a man himself then, young, untested, and dragged into a raid he had never asked to lead. Smoke rolled through the corridors in black sheets. Somewhere below, people were screaming. But what he remembered most was the smell of scorched stone. He found the woman collapsed against a nursery wall, blood soaking through her gown, one arm curled protectively around a bundle of blankets. When she saw him, she didn't scream. She looked almost relieved. "You," she rasped. "You're the one the moon sent." Rowan frowned. He didn't understand what she meant. He still didn't. Not fully. Not even now. The woman pushed the bundle toward him. Inside was a baby girl. She watched Rowan with wide, impossibly steady eyes. She wasn't crying. She wasn't afraid. She simply stared at him as though she already knew who he was. "Her name is Claire," the woman whispered. "Protect her until she's ready. Never let them know what she is." She swallowed painfully. "Not even her." "Who?" Rowan asked, stepping closer. "Ready for what? Who's coming?" But the woman's eyes had already begun to lose focus, fixed on something beyond his shoulder. Her final words came so quietly that Rowan almost missed them. "Find her again when the moon calls her home." She took one last breath. "You'll know when." Then she was gone. The ceiling above them groaned. Rowan looked down at the baby in his arms, then toward the collapsing corridor. He had no idea who Claire was. He had no idea what she was. And he certainly had no idea why the moon had chosen him to protect her. But he ran. He carried the stranger's baby against his chest and disappeared into the burning night. He had no idea that the promise he made that night would take him 20 years to fulfill. Back in the present, Claire stared at the man kneeling in front of her, none of that history written anywhere on his face except in the way he looked at her. Like he was still waiting for permission to believe she was real. 20 years, she whispered. "I don't even know you." Something moved behind Rowan's eyes, grief, maybe, or 20 years of a promise finally within reach. "No," he said quietly. "But I know you. I've known you since before you could walk. Comment the city you're tuning in from tonight. I read every one and I genuinely love finding out how far this story is traveling to reach you. Follow so you don't miss what Rowan reveals next." Claire had been awake since before the sun, scrubbing frost from the kitchen windows while the rest of the servants' quarters still slept. It was easier that way. Fewer eyes. Fewer reasons for someone to remind her what she was. She had lived in the lower halls of Moonfang Castle for as long as she could remember, in a room beneath the servants' quarters where the cold settled into the stone and never quite left. She didn't remember her parents. She didn't remember anything before the age of 4, when Matron Yura had found her wandering the eastern woods alone and dragged her back to the castle like a stray. No one had ever come looking for her. No one had ever claimed her. She had simply become what the castle needed her to be, a pair of hands, a bent back, a girl who didn't ask questions. She was an Omega. The lowest rank a wolf could be born into, and by every account, an unusually weak one even for that. Her wolf rarely stirred. She had never shifted past a shaking, half-formed shape that made the older betas laugh behind their hands. She flinched at loud voices. She apologized for things that weren't her fault. She had learned, a long time ago, that surviving meant staying small. But there was one thing about her that no one could explain, and it was the one thing she never spoke of out loud. The dreams. Since she was a child, she had dreamed of a silver wolf standing beneath a blood-red moon, its eyes fixed on hers with an intensity that made her chest ache even in sleep. And every time, right before she woke, the same words echoed through her skull like they'd been carved there. Do not let them know who you are. She had no idea who them was. She had no idea who she was either, not really. All she had from whatever life came before the castle was a small silver pendant, cold and unadorned, that she wore beneath her collar where no one could see it. She didn't know where it came from. She only knew that when she touched it, some small, buried part of her felt less alone. Tonight was the sacred moon ceremony, and Claire had spent the last hour trying not to hope. It was foolish to hope. She knew that. The ceremony was where every unmated wolf in the kingdom discovered their fated mate beneath the moon goddess's light, and Omegas like her were rarely chosen, and when they were, it was rarely a mercy. But some small, stubborn ember in her chest refused to go out completely. Maybe tonight would be different. Maybe someone, somewhere, would look at her and not see something to be ashamed of. Matron Yura shoved a ceremonial dress into her arms, ivory, secondhand, a little too big, and told her not to embarrass herself. Claire dressed in silence, tucked the pendant beneath the collar, and walked toward the ceremonial hall with her chin low and her hands folded, the way she always did. She didn't expect the moon altar to react to her. But the moment she stepped near it, before the ceremony had even begun, before a single name had been called, the ancient stone surface let out a low, resonant hum, and every candle in the hall flickered at once. No one else seemed to notice. No one ever noticed her. But Claire felt it in her bones, and for the first time in her life, she was afraid of exactly what it might mean. The ceremony began the way it always did, nobles in gold and black arranged around the hall, the moon altar glowing faintly beneath hundreds of candles, wolves called forward one by one to learn who the goddess had chosen for them. When Claire's name was called, a ripple of confused laughter moved through the crowd, like no one had expected her to be included at all. Then the altar's light surged toward Damon. The golden heir of one of the kingdom's strongest bloodlines turned pale, then furious, as the crowd began to cheer. Because for one dizzying moment, before anyone understood what was happening, they assumed the goddess had gifted Damon with an Omega bride out of some cruel cosmic joke, and the cheering was for him, not her. Claire barely had time to feel anything before Damon's expression curdled into disgust. "This is a mistake," he said, loud enough for the entire hall to hear. The cheering died into murmurs. "Look at her." He gestured at her worn dress, her bare feet, the dirt still faintly visible under her nails from the morning's work. "You expect me to believe the goddess chose this for me?" Claire's face burned. She wanted to disappear into the marble floor. "I refuse to be humiliated in front of my own court," Damon continued, turning to the crowd like he was the one who'd been wronged. "I reject Claire." The words hit her like a physical blow. Around her, the laughter returned, sharper now, crueler, delighted by the spectacle. Someone threw an insult. Someone else laughed loud enough to be heard over the rest. Claire's knees gave out beneath her, and she didn't have the strength left to stop herself from hitting the cold stone floor. Damon turned to a beautiful woman in violet silk standing near the noble houses. "I choose Seraphina instead." The hall erupted. Claire knelt in the wreckage of her own humiliation, tears burning in her eyes, and somewhere deep inside her, her wolf let out a small, broken whimper, the sound of something that had given up trying to be brave. That was when the great doors at the end of the hall exploded open. The laughter died instantly. Every wolf in the hall turned toward the doorway, and what Claire saw through her tears made no sense at first. Guards dropping to their knees, alphas who never bowed to anyone lowering their heads to the floor, an entire room of powerful wolves folding in on themselves like reeds in a storm. King Rowan walked through the wreckage of their fear like it belonged to him. Black armor, gold embroidery catching candlelight, a heavy fur-lined cloak dragging behind him. Claire had heard stories about him her whole life, the Alpha King who answered to no one, who had never bowed before another living soul. She had never imagined she would see him this close. He didn't look at Damon. He didn't look at the nobles, or the wolf carved into the wall above the altar, or anyone else in that crowded hall. He walked straight toward her. "Your Majesty," Damon started, stepping forward, his voice suddenly small. "This is a misunderstanding. She's only a servant, I didn't." Rowan didn't so much as glance at him. Whatever she expected to find in his eyes, it wasn't this. Not cold authority, not condescension, not pity. Something that looked almost like grief, and underneath it, disbelief, like he'd spent so long searching for something he'd stopped letting himself believe he'd ever find it. "I have been searching for you," he said, "for 20 years. The hall didn't breathe. "I don't understand," Claire whispered, her voice raw. "I'm no one. I'm an Omega. I clean floors." Something flickered across Rowan's face, anger, maybe, though not directed at her. "You are not who they told you that you are," he said. "Someone has spent your entire life making sure you never found out the truth. And I intend to undo every part of it." Claire's hands trembled against the cold stone. "Who are you?" she asked, because it was the only question that made any sense to ask. Rowan's jaw tightened, like the answer cost him something to give. "The man who was supposed to find you," he said, before they did. Claire didn't remember much of the walk from the ceremonial hall to the palace. She remembered Rowan's cloak brushing her shoulder as he guided her through corridors she'd only ever seen from behind a mop. She remembered servants freezing mid-step to stare at her, their expressions caught somewhere between confusion and something closer to fear. She remembered nobles pressed against the walls, whispering behind gloved hands, none of them quite able to look directly at her. No one had ever looked at Claire twice in her life. Now she couldn't walk 10 feet without someone's eyes following her like she was something dangerous. The royal council met them in the throne hall before Rowan could even get her settled. A cluster of older wolves in ceremonial gray, led by a sharp-eyed man named Counselor Halvern, who took one look at Claire's ruined dress and dismissed her without hesitation. "Your Majesty, this is highly irregular," Halvern said. "Whatever spectacle occurred at the ceremony, the girl is clearly an ordinary Omega. Return her to the servants' quarters and let the court forget this ever." "She stays," Rowan said, in a tone that ended the conversation before it started. Halvern's jaw tightened, but he said nothing further. It was the royal seer, an ancient woman named Mira with clouded eyes that seemed to see more than they should, who changed everything. She was summoned to the hall within the hour, and the moment she stepped through the doors and laid eyes on Claire, she went completely still. "Come closer, child," Mira said quietly. Claire hesitated, then obeyed. The old woman reached out with trembling fingers, not touching her, just hovering near the collar of her dress, near the pendant hidden beneath it. "Show me," Mira whispered. Claire drew the pendant out with shaking hands. The moment it caught the candlelight, it began to glow, faint at first, then brighter, a soft silver light pulsing like a heartbeat. Myra's face went white. She stumbled back a step, one hand pressed to her mouth, staring at Claire like she was looking at a ghost. "Tell me what you see," Rowan said, stepping forward. The old seer's eyes filled with tears. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried through the entire silent hall. "Your Majesty," she said. "The Moon Queen's daughter is alive." In the days that followed, Claire began to notice things about herself that she couldn't explain. Sounds she'd never been able to hear before, a servant's whispered conversation 3 rooms away, the faint rustle of wine through the outer gardens, came to her sharp and clear, as if some barrier around her senses had quietly begun to crack. Twice, catching her own reflection in a dark window, she thought she saw her eyes flash silver before fading back to their usual brown. At night, she dreamed of a woman she had never met. Dark hair, tired eyes, a voice that felt achingly familiar despite belonging to a stranger. In the dream, the woman knelt in front of her, cupping her face with gentle hands. "Ira," the woman whispered. Claire woke with a gasp, her pendant burning warm against her skin. She didn't know why that name hurt. She didn't know whether the woman had been calling her Ira, or whether she'd been remembering someone else entirely, someone whose absence still lived inside that dream like an open wound. Her wolf. Not the weak, half-formed thing she'd always known, something larger, ancient, straining against invisible chains. She found Rowan in the palace gardens the next morning and told him everything, the dreams, the voice, the name Ira, the strange pressure building behind her ribs like something trying to break free. Rowan listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with every word. "Your wolf isn't weak," he said finally. "It's sealed. Someone bound it deliberately, a long time ago." Claire stared at him. "Sealed? Why would anyone do that to a child?" "Because they were afraid of what you'd become if they didn't," Rowan said quietly. "You suspected this," Claire said. "It wasn't a question. Before tonight. You already knew something was wrong with me." Rowan was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed somewhere past her shoulder, on some memory she couldn't see. "I knew your mother," he said finally. Before Claire could ask him what that meant, before she could ask anything at all, a shadow moved wrong at the edge of the garden, and a blade cut through the dark, aimed straight for her throat. The blade never reached her throat. Rowan moved faster than Claire's eyes could follow, a blur of black and gold crossing the garden, and the attacker was gone before she'd even finished flinching, vanished over the outer wall into the dark, leaving nothing behind but a torn scrap of grey cloak and the frantic hammering of her own heart. His guards searched the grounds until dawn and found nothing else. Whoever had come for her had planned their escape as carefully as their attempt. Claire didn't sleep that night. She sat wrapped in a blanket by the window, turning the same question over and over, who wants me dead badly enough to try it inside the king's own palace, until Serafina appeared at her door just after sunrise, still in her violet ceremony silks, dark circles under her eyes like she hadn't slept either. Claire's first instinct was distrust. This was the woman Damon had chosen over her, the woman who'd stood beside him while the whole hall laughed. But Serafina didn't come in with pity or apology. She came in with fear. "I didn't betray you," she said, before Claire could even speak. "Whatever you think happened at that ceremony, I need you to know I had no choice." "You looked pleased enough standing next to him." "I looked terrified," Serafina said quietly. "My family owes the council a debt I don't fully understand, and 3 days before the ceremony, Councillor Halvin told my father that if I didn't stand beside Damon when he rejected you, that debt would be called in full. I didn't know what that meant. I still don't. I only knew my family would be ruined if I refused." Claire studied her, searching for a lie and not finding one. "The council orchestrated all of it," Serafina continued. "The mate bond between you and Damon wasn't real. It was forced, an old binding ritual, expensive and nearly impossible to trace unless you know exactly what to look for. I only found out because I overheard Halvin bragging about it to another counselor, like it was something clever instead of something cruel. Why would they force a false bond just to have him reject me?" "Because a rejected mate is humiliated," Serafina said. "Publicly. Completely. They needed the entire kingdom to believe you were worthless before anyone discovered what you really are. A dead Omega raises questions. A worthless one everyone already despises? No one asks questions when she disappears. The floor seemed to tilt beneath Claire's feet. Her humiliation, the laughter, Damon's cruelty, the entire kingdom watching her break, none of it had been an accident. It had been built, piece by piece, specifically to destroy her before she ever had the chance to become anything else. They tried to kill me last night, Claire said slowly. Seraphina's face went pale. Then you're running out of time. Rowan's steward mentioned they searched your old room in the servants' quarters after you left. Whatever they were looking for, I don't think they found it. But you might, if you know where to look. Claire went back to that cold room beneath the servants' quarters that same afternoon, Rowan insisting on coming with her despite her protests. It looked exactly as she'd left it. Narrow bed, bare stone, nothing that had ever belonged to her except the few worn dresses hanging on a peg. But when she pressed her palm against the wall beside the headboard, the way she used to as a child without ever knowing why, a loose stone shifted beneath her fingers. Behind it, wrapped in cloth gone soft with age, was a letter. Her hands shook so badly Rowan had to help her unfold it. My daughter, it began, and Claire's breath caught before she'd read another word. If you are reading this, then I am gone, and you have somehow survived what I could not protect you from. I am so sorry, Ira. I am so sorry for all of it. You are not who they will tell you that you are. You were born the daughter of the Moon Queen, heir to a bloodline older than the kingdom itself, and there are people who fear that inheritance more than they fear anything else in this world. They killed me for it. I do not know if they will come for you too, but I could not bear to let you grow up without knowing the truth, even if I am not there to tell you myself. Your wolf carries a gift older than any crown. Do not let anyone convince you it makes you dangerous. It makes you free. If the moon has mercy, someone will find you before they do. I pray it is him. I love you more than every star in every sky. Your mother. Claire read it 3 times before she could speak. Ira, she whispered. That's my name. My real name. Rowan's throat worked like the word had struck something loose inside him. Your mother called you that in every letter she ever wrote. I didn't know if you'd remember it. I didn't know if you could. You knew her, Claire said. It wasn't a question anymore. I was young when I met her, Rowan said quietly, sitting beside her on the narrow bed that had been Claire's whole world for 20 years. Barely into my own crown, still learning what it meant to lead. She was already queen of the Moonlight Court by then, older than me, wiser than me, patient with me in a way I didn't deserve. She treated me like family long before I'd earned it. I was there the night the council came for her stronghold. I found you in the wreckage, 1 year old, wrapped in her arms, and she made me promise to protect you before she died in front of me. I searched for years. Everyone told me you died in the fire alongside her. I never believed it, not completely, but I had no proof, no trail, nothing, until the goddess herself put you in front of me at that ceremony and I finally understood why I could never let that promise go. Claire understood now, the kneeling, the 20 years, the grief behind his eyes when he'd first looked at her. It wasn't a stranger's obsession. It was a promise kept at the worst possible moment, in front of the very people who wanted her dead. For the first time since the fire she couldn't remember, Claire let herself lean into someone else's shoulder and simply breathe. She didn't notice the servant lingering outside her door a moment too long before slipping away into the corridor. They came before midnight. Claire woke to shouting in the halls and Rowan's guards falling in the courtyard below her window, and by the time she reached the corridor, black-cloaked wolves loyal to the council had already breached the palace walls. She fought, clawed, screamed, struck out with a strength she didn't know she had. But there were too many of them, and a needle of something bitter pressed into her neck sent the world sliding sideways before she could call for Rowan. She woke bound inside the Moon Temple, ancient stone walls lit by torchlight, Counselor Helvin standing over her with an expression of grim satisfaction. 21 years, he said, and you still don't know what you are. Tell me, then, Claire spat. Your mother's bloodline was prophesied to rise beneath the blood moon and bring every wolf who wronged her to their knees. We couldn't let a child grow into that kind of power, so we sealed your wolf before you could walk, and we made certain the woman who raised you believed you were nothing worth protecting. Halvern crouched to her eye level. It worked beautifully. Even your king couldn't find you until the goddess forced our hand. He'll come for me. He already has. Halvern smiled thinly. And he will die for it. The temple doors shattered inward. Rowan tore through the council's guards like a storm given shape, and for a moment Claire believed he might actually win, until 3 of Halvern's strongest alphas surrounded him at once, and a blade meant for his ribs found its mark instead. He staggered. Fell to one knee, not in reverence this time, but because his body gave out beneath him, blood soaking dark through black armor. You see? Halvern said softly, almost gently, as if delivering a kindness. Even your king cannot save you. Claire stared at Rowan crumpled on the temple floor, and something inside her chest, something that had been chained since before she could remember, finally cracked open. Her wolf's voice came through clear and unmistakable for the first time in her life. Claire. It's time. The seal broke like ice shattering on a frozen lake. Silver light erupted from Claire's chest, flooding the temple, and every torch guttered out at once as her own glow became the only light in the room. Her eyes burned bright silver. The bindings around her wrists disintegrated to ash. Somewhere far beyond the temple walls, wolves across the entire kingdom felt the pressure of an ancient power waking after 21 years of silence, and every one of them, Alpha or Omega, dropped instinctively to their knees. Halvern stumbled backward, his face draining of color. It's not possible. The seal was absolute. You sealed a child, Claire said, and her voice didn't shake anymore. You should have been more afraid of the woman she'd become. She rose to her feet, and the temple itself seemed to bend toward her, silver light pouring off her skin like moonlight given form. Halvern tried to command her, some old authority in his voice, some council trick meant to bind lesser wolves, and it broke against her like water against stone. Damon, cowering near the temple entrance where he'd been dragged along as a witness, fell to his knees before her. Claire, please, I didn't know, I swear I didn't know what they were planning. She looked at him for a long moment. 21 years of humiliation lived in that look, every laugh, every cruelty, every night she'd told herself she deserved it. I'm not going to hurt you, she said finally. But you will stand in front of this entire kingdom and tell them exactly what you knew, and exactly when you learned it. Everyone deserves the truth. Even the people who never gave it to me. Halvern alone did not kneel. Not until Claire turned toward him, and the full weight of the Moon Queen's daughter settled over that ancient temple, and even he could not remain standing beneath it. She didn't kill him. She sentenced him publicly, forced every pack loyal to the council to hear the truth of what they'd done to a woman they'd sworn to protect. Justice, not vengeance. Her mother's letter had asked for nothing less. Then she turned to Rowan, still bleeding on the temple floor, struggling to push himself upright out of some stubborn refusal to be seen as anything less than strong in front of her. She didn't wait for him to kneel. She crossed the temple and held out her hand instead. The healers said it would take weeks for Rowan to fully recover, but he insisted on standing beside Claire the very next day, when the truth of everything was laid bare before the kingdom. Halvern and the corrupted council members who'd conspired with him were stripped of their titles and imprisoned. Damon, true to his word, confessed everything in front of the same nobles who had once laughed at Claire's humiliation, and lost his own title in the process, no longer heir to anything, no longer anyone's concern. Seraphina, who had risked everything to warn Claire, was named among her most trusted advisors, the first true friend Claire had ever had inside those palace walls. Claire was crowned Moon Queen beneath a sky full of stars, her mother's bloodline finally restored, her true name spoken aloud for the first time in 20 years. Though she asked, quietly, that the kingdom continue to call her Claire. It was the name she'd survived under. She wasn't ashamed of it anymore. Weeks later, she returned to the ceremonial hall where it had all begun. The black marble floor was the same. The banners still hung with their silver wolf's snarling head. She stood in the exact spot where she'd once knelt in a torn dress while an entire kingdom laughed. Rowan stood beside her, his hand finding hers. Do you still remember the night they laughed at you? He asked quietly. Claire smiled. I remember. She looked across the hall, at the place where she had fallen to her knees, at the space where Damon had once stood so certain of his own cruelty. But I don't remember the girl they laughed at. Why? Rowan asked. Claire looked up toward the window, where the moon hung soft and silver over the kingdom she now belonged to. Because she died the moment she realized she was never worthless. Then, without a trace of the fear that had once lived in every step she took through that hall, Claire walked toward the throne.